going to show you some photographs. This states 45. You recognize this area?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What room was it that you say you described this as a TV room?
TV room or the living room.
Okay. Is there a photograph or a painting that's in that room? The one that I'm pointing to?
Yes, ma'am, on the left side of that photo.
And this is Bo?
Yes, ma'am, that's a portrait of Bo.
Blonde when he was smaller?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And next to him, I know it's cut off, next to him it's a picture of the two children?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Do you remember how that was made, or if it was a gift or anything?
Yes, ma'am, it was a gift for me for Father's Day 2001. I remember it being right around 9/11 time.
Okay. This photograph states 50. Is this another living room area?
Yes, ma'am, that would be more the formal living room.
Okay, and is that normally where your Christmas tree would be during the holidays?
In the Tampa Palms home, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And at that time, when the photographs were taken on January 28, 2011, the Christmas tree was still up?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, were you involved in decorating the home for Christmas?
Usually not, ma'am.
Were you home when the decorating was done?
In 2010,
Yes.
I don't remember being home when it was done, ma'am.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as states 22. What area is this of your?
And that's a view from the kind of the sink area in the kitchen over towards the table that was in the kitchen overlooking the island.
All right, and so there's an island, and then next to the cabinets and the dresser over, I'm sorry, the cabinets and the counter over here, is that a desk area?
That's what we used it as, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what kind of items would be there?
Ma'am, I think kind of normally, usually routinely, there was a coffee pot there. There was a calendar that I've been shown before here. Julie would put her purse there. The phone was there and an answering machine, as well as various papers. That was kind of the family filing system, I guess, if you will.
Now, the calendar, you identified some writing on the calendar. Did you all participate in writing on the calendar?
I don't ever remember seeing any or much of Bo's writing on the calendar. Calix would put some events from time to her events on there. Julie obviously would put hers as well, and then I would add as I testified to the other day.
Okay. And the area that's underneath that desk, is that a wine cooler?
Yes, ma'am. That the black spot there is.
Okay. And to the left of the wine cooler, what is that?
The table?
Yes.
That's a bar, ma'am.
Showing you states 19. Do you recognize that purse?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And whose purse is that?
It's the defendant's.
Okay. The books that are located to the top left, whose books are those?
In the corner, they would not be my books.
Okay.
They probably more than likely they'd be Julie's.
Okay. And the book that's to the top left, it's entitled "How to Change Lifelong Self-Defeating Thinking Habits." Was that your book?
No, ma'am.
Did Ms. Schenecker read self-help books?
From time to time across the 20 years, yes, ma'am.
The purse that's in that photograph and states was introduced as states 19E. Do you recognize this as being the same purse that was in the photograph?
It looks similar, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Now, this wallet that's inside of the purse in States 19E, is that a wallet that you're familiar with, this green wallet?
She had a few over the years, so it wouldn't surprise me that's in there.
Okay. And did she keep photographs in that wallet?
I believe so.
Showing you the wallet, and I'll take out the photograph, from States 19E. Do you recognize this photo?
Yes, ma'am.
If I can get it in the... When was that photo taken?
Ma'am, I'm assuming that was sometime 2000 or 2001.
And who's in that photograph?
The defendant to the right, top left-hand corner, is my daughter Calix, and at the bottom looking up is my son Bo.
Now, was that photograph taken at the same time as the photograph that was on the wall in your TV room?
This is a photograph. The image you were referring to is a portrait.
Okay. Was that portrait made from a photograph? If
Yes,
you're
ma'am.
aware? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Were they taken at the same time as these photographs, or do you know?
I'm not sure.
Okay. This other photograph that was in the wallet. Do you recognize that photograph?
I don't, but that was my family.
Okay. Do you remember the function that this was taken at?
No, ma'am, I don't.
Okay. And I'm sorry, who's in the photograph? Just
In the center is the defendant. To her left in the white dress is my daughter Calix. To the defendant's right in the coat and tie is my son Bo.
I'm going to show you another photograph that's... Do you recognize this photograph?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
And who's in that photograph?
So the defendant and myself.
When was that taken?
It was taken in Old Town, Alexandria, Virginia. I don't know the time frame.
Okay.
I assume when we were assigned in Virginia, but we had been there other times.
Okay. This photograph that was in the purse, do you remember that photograph?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
When was that taken?
That was taken in Pennsylvania.
And who's in that photograph?
That would be the defendant to her right in the white sweater, my daughter Calix, and her cat to immediately in front of me, my son Bo, and myself.
Family photograph that the state introduced on 38B. Do you remember when that photograph was taken?
I don't remember exactly, but I think it might have been around Christmas 2009.
Okay. Defense Exhibit 2. Do you remember when that photograph was taken?
Ma'am, there's a date in the bottom left-hand corner of the photo, so that would be the date of that photo.
Do you remember the event?
I do, ma'am.
What was that?
It was my brother's wedding.
Okay. When did you in January 2011.
I departed the U.S. on the 19th of January 2011.
Prior to leaving on the 19th, did you have any email communication with your wife at the time about another wedding that you were doing planning for?
I'm not recalling, ma'am.
Okay.
Could you refresh my memory?
Would looking at the email refresh your recollection?
Sure, that would be great.
Your Honor, if I may approach?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
You can look up after you finish your email.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was on January 19th that you had some communication about attending a wedding?
Yes, ma'am. That'd been my brother's wedding.
Okay,
Not the one in the photo. This is another wedding.
okay. And the wedding taking place on what day?
So we're flying to San Antonio on Friday, the 29th of April, flying home together on Sunday, the 1st of May. So I'm assuming it was that Saturday.
Okay, if I may approach him. Did you schedule the family travel?
For that trip,
Just in general, was that something that you normally did, or did Ms. Schenecker do that?
most of the time I scheduled it. There would be some times where Julie would as well.
So in this case, you had scheduled some traveling to happen in April, and you were informing her on the 19th before you left the country?
Just as a reminder, yes, ma'am. If I remember correctly, that was the trip that Calix and I were going to Dallas so she could shadow at the boarding school there.
Okay, your trip was going to be twofold, to go to the wedding and also travel with her so she could shadow?
Yes, ma'am.
As far as the boarding school goes, that boarding school that you were talking about would have been in Texas that you were going to have her shadow?
Yes, ma'am. It's a school I was familiar with growing up.
Okay. And you still had family that resided in Texas or friends that were around there?
I had friends around that area, yes, ma'am.
When you departed in January of 2011, you indicated that you had a conversation with Ms. Schenecker before you left?
Yes, ma'am.
If I could have one moment.
Yeah.
Pass the witness.
May cross-examine. Thank you. Mr. Schenecker, all the photographs that counsel just showed you, those were taken at a time well before Ms. Schenecker started abusing drugs and alcohol, isn't that correct?
That is true, sir.
Early in your testimony this morning, sir, you used the word allowed in reference to your ability to talk to Dr. Spear when the defendant was participating in what started out to be a clinical study at the National Institute for Mental Health. Could you describe for the jury what you meant by your use of the word allowed?
Yes, sir. So when Julie went into the clinical trial, one of the things that the set of paperwork was a release statement from each of the patients to their family members that allowed the doctors to speak with us and allowed us to speak with the doctors specifically about symptoms, specifically about the protocols of the trial, to talk about any diagnoses that had been given or refuted during the trial themselves, basically to bring us into the clinical trial so we could be part of the experience itself and understand what was going on.
At the conclusion of her participation in that, you became aware of her having been diagnosed as having bipolar disorder. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And for the next 15 or 20 years, how many times were you allowed into her treatment for her bipolar disorder?
0 times, sir.
Were you aware that she was seeing of psychiatrists at each stop of your relocations in your service?
Yes, sir.
Were you allowed to talk to her treating physicians in those stops?
Never.
After the clinical study where they used some type of magnetic treatment, what was the phrase again?
Repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, RTMS.
RTMS, I'll use that, thank you. After she participated in that, you were transferred to Germany, is that correct?
That's true, sir.
And the military had a program you alluded to in your direct examination to take care of family members, this is my phrase, with special needs of some sort.
It was called the Exceptional Family Member Program.
And did you, upon your transfer to Germany, take your family?
Yes, sir, I did.
And knowing your wife's treatment with the magnetic RTMS, did you take steps through that military program to search for a practitioner familiar with that RTMS that was in Germany?
Yes, sir, I did.
Were you able to find one?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to coordinate in some fashion the defendant's treatment with that provider?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Were you allowed to speak with that provider
No, sir.
about his or her care with the defendant?
No, sir.
Okay. So you weren't just sitting on the sidelines and saying, bipolar disorder, that's on you, I'm too busy with myself. You were taking steps in your military career for the resources you had available to you to help address her mental disease from the time that you learned about it. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely.
But she never let you speak to her providers.
No, sir, she did not.
You spoke about the deterioration in the relationship between the defendant and your daughter, Kayleigh Schenecker, in the year or so leading up to Kayleigh's death. Isn't it a fact, sir, that the relationship wasn't helped out by the fact that this defendant didn't even acknowledge Kayleigh's birthday, 16th birthday, in September of 2010?
That is true, sir.
And isn't it also a fact that that relationship between the defendant and Kayleigh's wasn't helped out by the fact that Kayleigh's overheard the defendant telling someone on the phone that the defendant never loved Kayleigh's?
That's true, sir.
Objection.
You may approve.
In 2008 and 2009, were you aware that the defendant was gambling away thousands of dollars at the Hard Rock Casino?
No, sir, I only came to learn that after the kids passed away.
The defendant never admitted to you that she was gambling during the days at that location in Tampa?
No, sir, she did not.
On November 8th of 2010, when this defendant was involved in a collision, the fact was that she rear-ended a truck while traveling at high speed, wasn't that true?
She rented a truck that had a lawn trailer behind it as well.
And you'd gone to the scene, hadn't you?
I had not, sir,
Okay.
but I read the police report.
And spoken to the defendant about the incident, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in that collision, because of the impact, it pushed that truck several hundred feet beyond impact. It's not for the proof of the matter asserted, sir.
Just a moment. Just a moment. Overruled. Go ahead.
And it pushed that truck several hundred feet.
Yes, sir, that was what was in the police report.
You've indicated that that incident and the children's concerns about driving with their mother caused you to be so concerned that you told the defendant she wasn't coming back into the house until she went to alcohol rehab.
Yes, sir, that's true. Yes, sir.
And it's because not only that incident, but the children's concerns and increased drinking had led you to be concerned that she presented a risk of harm to the safety of not only your children, but to the kids that she was driving in carpool and to the drivers on the streets of Tampa.
Objection.
Going to allow you to approach.
So with all those concerns that I just mentioned that led you to require your wife to go to rehab as a condition to coming back home, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's true.
What was your concern about not letting her stay at home that night, as insofar as how the kids would react?
So as I've testified before, the relationship between Calix and Julie was not great. There was no way, first of all, that I was going to let Julie come back in the house and have a challenge to her dignity. She still needed to retain her dignity in some form or fashion, and to allow her in front of the kids after this had happened would not have done Julie any good. It certainly would not have done the kids any good. So immediate separation of those two was how I decided to solve the problem.
Now, you indicated either earlier today or in your previous testimony in this trial that you actually went to Winmore with the defendant and sat with her through the majority of the admission process for several hours until you had to pick up carpool. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And she was in there from November 10th to about November 18th, the records show. Did you, during those 18 days, just by words and actions, let the defendant know, this is your problem, I'm not involved, I'm not going to be concerned about your treatment program at all? Or did you take steps to visit and be integrated?
I took steps to visit, sir. I not only took her to the intake and made sure that I was there as much as I could be that day. I went back later that night once she had been admitted. She had asked me to bring her some items, I believe some Coca-Cola. I had to bring some other items, hair conditioners and so forth without alcohol. And then I went back the next day and brought a sweater and some other items. Sometimes I went 2 or 3 times in a day to visit her as long as I was in town.
And Winmore isn't just around the corner from Tampa Palms or around the corner from MacDill Air Force Base, is it?
It is not, sir.
It's all the way over in Pinellas County.
Pinellas County off Highway 19, yes, sir.
And Highway 19 is a main road in Pinellas County, is that correct?
It's in Pinellas, yes, sir.
All right. And in one of the early visits, on about the 4th or 5th day that the defendant was in Winmore for her rehabilitation from alcohol issues, you had a conversation with her where she begged you to get her out of there. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did she tell you why she wanted out of there?
Yes, sir, she did.
What'd she say?
She told me that she didn't like being locked up.
Did you immediately check her out of that rehab program and take her home?
No, sir, I did not.
What'd you tell her? What did you tell her?
What did I tell her? I told...
Sustained.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, sir, I'll hear from you.
You've already indicated on direct examination that for Thanksgiving of 2010, you took the children and met other members of your family, I believe, up in the Panhandle to celebrate Thanksgiving. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
On that Wednesday before Thanksgiving, you learned that the defendant was eligible for a release from that program. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But you did not choose to go from the Panhandle down to back to Tampa to check her out. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. You chose instead to wait until after the Thanksgiving holiday on that Sunday immediately following Thanksgiving. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you checked her out of the Winmore facility at that time, right?
Sunday the 28th, yes, sir.
Now, on that occasion or shortly after that, this defendant expressed extreme anger at the fact that you...
Objection, counsel testifying.
Overruled. It's a cross-examination. complete your question, sir.
Thank you. At that point, or around that time, this defendant expressed extreme anger towards you that because you made her stay in rehab for 3 or 4 extra days. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you had learned through your conversation with the defendant, even prior to her admission into the rehab, that she had, at the time of the collision, she was driving to an AA meeting, but had decided to have a few glasses of wine before she got in the car. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir, that's what she told me.
Was there ever a time in your marriage to the defendant that you were concerned about her driving as a result of her depression when she wasn't known by you to be drinking?
No, sir.
And after the defendant was admitted into Winmore, you immediately decided to advise Dr. Obregon of her admission by an email communication. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Upon the defendant's release from Winmore rehab in late November of 2010, did you again contact Dr. Obregon via email?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
For what purpose?
To give him an update on the situation, sir.
In addition to that, did you want to discuss with him a continuing following up treatment program upon her release or after her release?
Yes, sir. I had asked Dr. Obregon for some ideas on how to reassimilate Julie back into the family after coming out of rehab. I had no experience in that.
And Dr. Obregon indicated that the privacy rules of HIPAA prohibited him from discussing with you the defendant's care. Is that correct?
Correct.
As a result of Dr. Obregon refusing to discuss the defendant's care with you, did you take any steps to communicate in any fashion with the defendant a request for her to execute a release that would allow Dr. Obregon to have such conversations with you?
Yes, sir.
What form of communication did you have that conversation with the defendant?
In an email, sir.
And did the defendant respond?
She did, sir.
Did she indicate whether or not she was going to execute or sign a release allowing you to have conversation with Dr. Obregon about her treatment?
She indicated that she was not going to sign a release for me to be able to speak with Dr. Obregon.
And in fact, she indicated that on 2 separate conversations, did you see on 2 separate occasions, did you ask her for, or excuse me, on 2 separate occasions in email conversations, the defendant refused to allow or execute a release for information. Isn't that correct?
2 separate times, correct, sir.
And the very first time, her response was, "Sorry about your luck. I'm not going to do it," in so many words.
Yes, sir.
Let me show you what's been marked for identification in State's Exhibit number 10. Do you recognize that exhibit, sir?
Yes, sir, I do.
And what do you recognize it to be?
Sir, this is the conversation between Julie and myself on the issue of executing a HIPAA release.
Your Honor, move State's exhibit number, is it 100, I believe?
It is 100, sir.
Number 100 in evidence.
Can we approach?
Yes.
Everyone can be seated, jury's exited the courtroom. I guess I'll hear from counsel. I'd be wanting to ask whether or not, since this is marked in as an exhibit and you all had it, whether or not you addressed this beforehand in its entirety or not.
Judge, we've had 5 computers worth of emails, so no, we haven't addressed this specific email.
Okay. All right. Well, you get to now, because I'm going to step off and I'm going to give you a few minutes to go through it. If there's some portion of that that you agree is either not relevant or in fact constitutes hearsay that should be excluded, then you'll identify that and I'll give you that opportunity. If not, I'll come back and I'll hear, if need be, line by line, your respective view of this material, whether it is subject to an objection because it's not relevant, and or whether it's hearsay, not hearsay, or if hearsay, whether an exception applies. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to go over that. Sir, if you wish to step down during this break, you may. However, I'll instruct you not to discuss your testimony until you return to the stand.
Yes, sir.